Earlier this week, we learned horrendous new details about the final moments of the 4 Idaho students that were savagely killed in their off-campus home back in 2022. The sheer number of stab wounds, more than 150 in total. It is horrible to think about. But these findings from newly released filings show where the defense may have wanted to go if there was a trial and Kohberger hadn't pled guilty. According to court filings that were obtained by People magazine, the defense had hired an expert forensic criminologist, Dr. Brent Tarvey. And while the entire outline is under seal, Dr. Tarvey did say, and I quote, "At least 2 suspects were involved in this attack, 2 killers."
It is February 2026. By now, most people believe justice has been served. Bryan Kohberger is serving life, and the case is officially closed. But after spending weeks combing through thousands of pages of newly declassified documents, I realized something terrifying. What I found was that the official story is missing crucial pieces. I am talking about a bloody Vans shoe print found right next to a survivor's room that does not match Kohberger's boots. And even more disturbing, there were 3 unknown male DNA samples at the scene that investigators decided to ignore, which tells us that the lone wolf theory might be completely wrong. So, you have to ask yourself, is Kohberger really the only monster, or is he just the fall guy for a 2-man job? Today, I am not just reading the headlines. I am taking you through the hidden evidence that proves he might not have been alone. So, let's go back to July of 2025. That was the moment the entire country let out a collective breath. Bryan Kohberger stood in an Idaho courtroom, looked the judge in the eye, and uttered the word, guilty. No trial. No cameras. Just a signature, 4 consecutive life sentences, and a guarantee that he would die in prison. On the surface, it looked like a clean victory for the state. But here is the reality. This plea deal wasn't just about justice. It was a strategic transaction. We know what Kohberger got out of it. He kept his life. He avoided the firing squad. But you have to ask what the prosecution got. Prosecutor Bill Thompson didn't just get a conviction, he got an exit strategy. By securing this deal, the state avoided the one thing they feared most, a public trial that would have dissected every single flaw in their investigation. The problem is, a trial is a stress test for the truth. In a trial, the prosecution has to explain everything. They would have had to explain how one man, in a white sedan, managed to control 4 victims on 2 different floors in under 20 minutes without leaving a chaotic trail of evidence. They would have had to explain why the timeline didn't perfectly match the digital data. By accepting the plea, they bypassed all of that. The deal included a condition of non-allocution on specific details. This means Kohberger admitted guilt, but he was not required to explain how he did it. He didn't have to recount the steps. He didn't have to tell us where the knife is. He just said, "I did it," and the case was sealed. In other words, the plea deal allowed the state to present a perfect, clean narrative of a lone wolf killer while sweeping all the jagged, uncomfortable pieces of evidence, the outliers, completely under the rug. What struck me here was the timing. It felt incredibly suspicious. This deal was struck just weeks before the defense was preparing to introduce explosive testimony from independent forensic experts. These experts were ready to challenge the single killer theory. They were ready to present data about unknown DNA samples found at the scene that the police had ignored. Right when the official story was about to be challenged in open court, the deal happened. Everything stopped. Which tells us that the prosecution wasn't just protecting the families from a painful trial. They were protecting their own narrative. They knew that if a jury saw the conflicting evidence, the lone wolf theory might fall apart. So, because there was no trial, the public was left with a version of the truth that feels safe, but incomplete. We were told who did it, but we were stopped from asking if he was alone. At this point, I decided I couldn't just accept the headline. I went back into the files that Bill Thompson didn't have to explain. And when you pull those files out of the dark, you realize they point to something much more complex than a single angry student with a knife. Now, we are going to look at exactly what they didn't want you to see. We are going to expose the 3 biggest blind spots in this case, evidence that suggests Bryan Kohberger might be a monster. But he likely wasn't the only one there that night. So, let's talk about the DNA. For the last 3 years, the entire narrative of this case has hinged on one microscopic speck of biological material. We have heard it a million times. The DNA on the button snap of the bar knife sheath found next to Maddie Mogen. That was the smoking gun. That was the match that pointed to Bryan Kohberger. And don't get me wrong, that evidence is powerful. It places him in the room. But here is what the prosecution and the media didn't spend much time talking about. When the Idaho State Police forensic team swept that house on King Road, they didn't just find Kohberger's DNA. They found a lot of biological data. And deep in the appendices of the forensic reports, the pages that usually get skimmed over, what I found was startling. The lab results confirmed the presence of 3 other unknown male DNA profiles at the crime scene. Now, pause for a second. We are talking about unknown male 1, unknown male 2, and unknown male 3. These did not belong to Ethan Chapin. They did not belong to any of the surviving roommates' boyfriends. They were ghosts. The thing is, police have a standard explanation for this. They called the house a party house. And to be fair, that is true. Hundreds of students walked through those doors on weekends. So, when investigators found the first 2 unknown profiles inside the living areas, they waved them away. They argued that it could be transferred DNA from a party guest a week ago, or a delivery guy, or someone who crashed on the couch. It's a convenient explanation, and in a courtroom, it's an easy sell. But here is the kicker. The 3rd sample, unknown male 3, was different. It wasn't found on a beer pong table. It wasn't found on a doorknob in the common area. It was found on a black latex nitrile glove that had been discarded right outside the window, mere feet from where the murders took place. Let that sink in. A latex glove, not a red Solo cup, not a cigarette butt. A piece of equipment that is specifically used to prevent leaving fingerprints. And inside that glove was a clear DNA profile of a male who is not Bryan Kohberger. The problem is, how did the investigation handle this? Once they got the match on the knife sheath for Kohberger, they seemingly developed tunnel vision. They labeled the glove as unrelated debris. They treated it as if it were just trash that happened to blow into the yard of a quadruple homicide scene. Which means they are asking us to believe in a massive coincidence. They want us to believe that on the very night a killer stalked into that house to slaughter 4 people, some random other person who just happened to be wearing forensic-style latex gloves, walked by the window, took the glove off, threw it on the ground, and vanished. And this is important, because it changes the physics of the crime. We know Kohberger left touch DNA on the sheath button. That suggests he might not have been wearing gloves when he handled that specific part of the weapon, or the gloves he had were compromised. But the person outside, the person who left the glove, they were geared up. From there we have to look at the 2-man theory. If Kohberger is the executioner, the one inside the house, in the frenzy, making mistakes, leaving his sheath behind, then who is the guy outside? In organized crime or tactical operations, you rarely work alone in a hostile environment. You have a spotter or a lookout. This is the person who stands in the shadows. This is the person who watches the street. This is the person who ensures the getaway car is running or signals that a neighbor's light just turned on. In other words, the glove fits the profile of an accomplice perfectly. If unknown male 3 was the lookout, his job wasn't to kill. His job was to wait. Perhaps he was nervous. Perhaps he took his glove off to smoke or to check a phone. Or maybe he just panicked during the extraction and dropped it. The police chose to ignore this because it complicates the timeline. A lone wolf is a simple story, one bad man, one knife, one verdict. But a second man, a second DNA profile on a piece of tactical gear right outside the window. That opens a door they didn't want to walk through. It suggests that while Kohberger was the weapon, someone else might have been the eyes and ears. So, we are left with a piece of physical evidence that physically connects another man to the perimeter of the crime scene. A man the police never identified. A man who, for all we know, is still walking free today because the state was too focused on the man inside the house to look at the man standing just outside of it. Which brings me to this question for you. I want you to really think about the odds here. We are talking about a latex glove found next to a murder house. Do you honestly believe that this was just random trash that landed there by accident on the same night? Or do you think this is physical proof of a second person that the police deliberately ignored to secure their conviction? Let me know what you think in the comments. Is it coincidence, or is it a cover-up? From there, we have to take our eyes off the window and look down at the floor. Because right here, on the hardwood and the carpet, the physical evidence is telling a story that is completely different from the one prosecutor Bill Thompson tried to sell us. I spent hours combing through the detailed crime scene logs, the exact documents that defense attorney Ann Taylor was planning to use to tear the state's case apart if this had actually gone to trial. And what I found was a detail that is absolutely agonizing to ignore. Police investigators found a very clear, latent bloody shoe print right outside the bedroom door of Dylan Mortensen, the surviving roommate on the second floor. The thing is, this wasn't just a smudge. It wasn't a shapeless blob of blood. It had a defined structure. Forensic experts identified the sole as having a specific demon pattern. Now, if you are a sneakerhead, or even if you just wore skate shoes in high school, you know exactly what I am talking about. That diamond tread is iconic. It is the signature sole of Vans. But here is where everything starts to get messy. Let's cross-reference this with what we know about Bryan Kohberger. We know who this guy is. He is a criminology PhD student. He is obsessive. He is disciplined. When the FBI and state police raided his apartment in Pullman and his parents' house in Pennsylvania, they didn't just look around, they stripped those places bare. They seized everything. We have seen the inventory lists. They found running shoes. They found hiking boots. They found snow boots. The problem is, in dozens of pages of seized evidence, there was absolutely zero record of a pair of Vans. There was no receipt for Vans, no empty Vans shoebox in the closet, no photos on his phone of him wearing Vans. Nothing, and this is important, because it goes against the psychological profile of the suspect. Think about Dylan Mortensen's testimony. This is the cornerstone of the prosecution's timeline. She described the figure she saw as a man, clad in black, wearing a mask that covered his nose and mouth. She described a figure that looked tactical, which tells us something crucial about the gear. People who dress in tactical gear to commit a violent crime, people who treat murder like a military operation, do not wear flat-soled, soft rubber skate shoes like Vans. They wear combat boots. They wear footwear with thick lug soles that grip the floor, that give them leverage and stability. You don't put on a full black tactical outfit and then slip on a pair of casual slip-ons. It doesn't make sense physically, and it doesn't make sense psychologically. So, what does this tell us? If that bloody Vans print didn't belong to the victims, who were likely barefoot or in socks in their beds, and it definitively did not belong to Bryan Kohberger, then whose footprint is it? It leads us to a theory that is much darker than the official narrative. It points to the one thing the police refused to entertain because it would have shattered their lone wolf case. There were two people in that house. Let's play this scenario out. Person number one is the executioner. This is Bryan Kohberger. He is the one Dylan saw. He is the one fitting the description, tall, lanky, dressed in tactical gear, wearing heavy boots. He is the one who carried the ka-bar knife upstairs to the third floor to attack Maddie and Kaylee. Dylan focused on him because he was the most terrifying thing in the hallway. Meanwhile, there is person number 2. Let's call him the Ghost. This is the owner of the vans. He isn't dressed in tactical gear. He is dressed more casually. He is wearing common sneakers to move quietly, to blend in. His role was likely on the second floor. Maybe he was the one who helped control Zana and Ethan. Or maybe his role was strictly containment, a cleaner, or a sentry. He moved in the shadows, in the blind spots that Dylan couldn't see from her cracked door. And most importantly, he left the house through a different route or at a slightly different time, leaving behind a bloody footprint that the police simply could not pin on Kohberger. In other words, the evidence suggests a division of labor. One man for the brutality, one man for the control. The police tried to wave this away. They suggested the print could be old, or from a previous party guest. But remember, the report says it was a latent bloody print. Bloody means it was made with fresh biological material. It was created in real time, during the massacre. The fact that no vans were found in Kohberger's possession should have been a massive red flag. It should have been exculpatory evidence, or at least proof that he wasn't alone. But prosecutor Bill Thompson chose to make the foot fit the shoe. They focused entirely on the DNA on the knife sheath upstairs and completely ignored the bloody footprint downstairs because it didn't fit their story. At this point, I actually get chills thinking about it. If this theory is right, then justice is only half done. Bryan Kohberger is sitting in a cell for the rest of his life, sure. But the Ghost, the guy in the vans, is still out there. He might be watching the news right now, smiling, knowing that the world thinks the case is closed. The police ignored this footprint because it didn't match their main suspect. That is a cold, hard fact. But put yourself in the jury box for a second. If you saw a bloody footprint at a murder scene that definitely did not belong to the defendant, do you think this was just a sloppy investigation, or do you think it is a deliberate cover-up to protect a conviction? Do you believe a tactical killer would wear skate shoes? Let me know your theory in the comments. Because to me, that van's print is the footprint of a ghost that the law refused to chase. At the same time, while we are looking at footprints on the floor, we have to look at the clock. Because if the shoe print suggests a second person inside the house, the timeline suggests a second person outside of it. This brings us to blind spot 3, and honestly, this is the detail that keeps me up at night. It is the arrival of the DoorDash driver. We know for a fact, confirmed by digital records and police statements, that Zana Kernodle was awake. She ordered food from Jack in the Box. At exactly 4 a.m., a DoorDash driver pulled up to 1122 King Road. He walked to the front door, dropped off the bag, likely took a confirmation photo as per protocol, and drove away. Now, look at the police timeline for the suspect. At 4:04 a.m., just 4 minutes later, Bryan Kohberger's white Hyundai Elantra is seen attempting to park and then entering the scene. The thing is, you have to stop and really analyze the risk here. Put yourself in the mind of a killer for a second. I know it's a dark place to go, but you have to do it to understand why this doesn't add up. Kohberger wasn't driving a blacked-out SUV. He wasn't invisible. He was driving a bright white sedan in a pitch-black neighborhood. That car is basically a neon sign. If he is acting alone, a true lone wolf, his adrenaline is spiking. He is paranoid. He is hyper-aware of everything. The problem is, how could he possibly know the DoorDash driver was gone? King Road is a dead-end street. It's a cul-de-sac. It's a trap. If Kohberger turns into that street at 4:04 a.m., he is taking a 100% gamble. For all he knew, that delivery driver could have been sitting in his car right in front of the house, checking his next order. He could have been fixing his GPS. He could have been texting his girlfriend. If Kohberger pulls up while that driver is still there, it's over. The driver sees him. The driver sees a man in a mask getting out of a car. The police are called. Game over. Which means, for a lone wolf to pull into that driveway just 4 minutes after a delivery, it is reckless to the point of stupidity. It is suicidal behavior, and Kohberger, a PhD student who studied the criminal mind, was not stupid. He was calculated. So, how do we explain this precision? There is only one logical explanation that fits the data. He didn't check the street himself. Someone checked it for him. This leads us directly to the spotter theory. In a coordinated tactical operation, you never enter a hot zone without eyes on the target. You have a spotter. This hypothetical accomplice wasn't in the Elantra. He was in a second vehicle, parked up the hill where the view is better, or maybe he was hiding in the dense tree line right behind the house, overlooking the back patio. Imagine this scenario. The spotter watches the DoorDash driver pull up at 4 a.m. He watches the driver drop the food. He watches the driver's taillights fade away down the street. The coast is clear. Then, he sends a signal. Maybe it was a text. Maybe it was a single ring on a burner phone. Maybe it was a flash of high beams. The message was simple. All clear. Go now. And this is important, because it explains the Bluetooth anomaly I mentioned earlier. Remember the OD Bluetooth signal? That mysterious digital handshake that moved in parallel with Kohberger, but kept a 50-meter distance. If that signal belonged to the spotter, it explains everything. It explains how Kohberger drove with such terrifying confidence. He didn't need to worry about being seen, because he had a second pair of eyes watching the blind spots for him. What I found was that the police dismissed the DoorDash timing as a coincidence. They want us to believe Kohberger just got lucky. They want us to believe he turned that corner at 4:04 a.m. and just hoped no one was there. But luck doesn't work like that. Not in a quadruple homicide that was executed this quickly. Luck is a gamble. This was a coordinated operation. The 4-minute gap isn't a coincidence, it's a window of opportunity that was opened by one person and walked through by another. So, when you combine this with the black glove outside and the van's shoe print inside, the picture shifts focus. We aren't looking at a student who snapped. We are looking at a team. One inside, doing the dirty work. One outside, watching the world to make sure they didn't get caught. And if that spotter exists, he saw everything. He watched the delivery. He watched the murders unfold from the shadows. And then, he watched the police arrive hours later, knowing he had gotten away with it. I want to hear your take on this because this is the detail that breaks the lone wolf theory for me. 4 minutes. That is the only gap between a food delivery and a massacre. Do you think Kohberger just got incredibly lucky that the driver left instantly? Or do you believe there was a second pair of eyes watching the street, signaling him that it was safe to attack? And finally, there is one last piece of physical evidence that almost everyone missed. It is a detail that got buried in the avalanche of breaking news during those first few chaotic weeks. But when you look at it now, in the context of a two-man theory, it screams for attention. I want to take you back to the week following the murders. The town of Moscow, Idaho, was paralyzed with fear. Police were combing through every inch of snow, looking for the murder weapon. And during this search, a sharp-eyed local resident spotted something strange. Lying on the ground near the trash dumpsters of the apartment complex, just a short distance from the crime scene, was a single, black glove. Police officers arrived. They photographed it. They bagged it. They tagged it as potential evidence. And then, silence. The public never heard about that glove again. The results of any DNA testing on it were never released. It simply vanished into the black hole of the investigation. The thing is, you might say, so what? It is winter in Idaho. People drop gloves. But we have to analyze this through the lens of criminal profiling. We have to look at the psychology of the man sitting in prison right now. We know Bryan Kohberger. We know his personality type. He is not just a criminology student, He is what psychologists call obsessive-compulsive. He is meticulous to a pathological degree. This is a man who, according to reports, wore surgical gloves just to handle his food at home to avoid leaving fingerprints on his own dishes. This is a man who, after the murders, didn't just wash his car. He scrubbed it. He reportedly wore gloves while cleaning the interior. He stripped the car so thoroughly with chemical agents that forensic experts struggled to find even a single speck of dust, let alone blood. Which means, Bryan Kohberger does not make sloppy mistakes. He does not accidentally drop a crucial piece of evidence, like a black glove on the ground, while walking away from a crime scene. His entire modus operandi is about control. It is about being sterile. It is about disappearing without a trace. So, if Kohberger didn't drop that glove, who did? This is where the connection happens. This glove does not fit the profile of the cold, calculated executioner. It fits the profile of the second man, the ghost, in the van's shoes. Let's go back to our theory. We have a second person. Maybe he is not a trained killer. Maybe he is an accomplice who was roped into this dark fantasy. Maybe his job was just to watch, or to help clean up. But then, he stepped inside that house. He saw the carnage on the 3rd floor. He saw the reality of what a knife does to a human body. He smelled the blood. The problem is, reality is very different from a plan. While Kohberger might have been in a state of dissociative focus, executing his mission, the second man likely panicked. When the adrenaline crashed and the fear set in, he didn't check his pockets. He didn't check his gear. He just ran. He scrambled out of there, terrified, desperate to get away from the horror he had just participated in. And in that frantic sprint to the getaway route, he dropped a glove. It is a classic sign of a disorganized offender versus an organized one. Kohberger is the organized one, the one who turns off his phone, the one who cleans the car. The owner of the glove is the disorganized one, the one who leaves footprints, the one who drops gear, the one who leaves a trail. Which tells us that there was not just one ghost in the night. There were two very different energies moving through the dark. There was one who was cold, clinical, and precise. That is Bryan Kohberger. And there was one who was frantic, terrified, and sloppy. That is the accomplice. By refusing to test or acknowledge this glove publicly, the prosecution avoided a messy question. If they found DNA on that glove that didn't match the victims and didn't match Kohberger, they would have had to admit that a second suspect exists. They would have had to admit that while they caught the monster, the man who helped him, the man who dropped the glove, is still out there, hiding in plain sight. Think about the psychology here. A man who cleans his car with bleach does not carelessly drop a glove next to a dumpster. It just does not fit. Do you think this glove belonged to a panicked accomplice who lost his nerve? Or are we supposed to believe it is just another coincidence in a case full of impossible coincidences? Tell me what you think. Who dropped the glove? What happened next is the part of the timeline that signals the end of the massacre. The killer leaves the house. He walks out into the cold Idaho night, gets into his car, and drives away. But this exit is where the forensic narrative hits a brick wall, and this is the blind spot that defies the laws of physics. We need to talk about the rear sliding glass door. To understand why this door is so important, we have to look at the condition of the crime scene. Based on the 2026 declassified autopsy reports, we know that the violence inflicted on those 4 students was extreme. We are talking about over 100 distinct wounds. When an attack like that happens, especially with a knife, it is not clean. It creates what forensic experts call cast-off and transfer patterns. The perpetrator would have been covered in blood. His gloves, his sleeves, his front. Everything would be compromised. The problem is, to leave the house, the killer had to go through the kitchen on the 2nd floor and exit through the sliding glass door. That door was locked earlier in the night. We know the roommates were home. We know it was freezing outside. it is reasonable to assume the door was shut. So, logic dictates that to leave, the killer had to reach out, grab the handle, unlock the latch, and slide the heavy glass door open. What I found was that when forensic teams swabbed that rear door handle and the surrounding frame, they found nothing. No blood. No latent bloody fingerprints. No smeared transferred DNA from the victims mixed with the killer's glove prints. The handle was forensic sterile. At this point, I started questioning everything. A clean door in a blood-soaked crime scene. Physically, how does that happen? If Bryan Kohberger was acting alone, are we supposed to believe that in the middle of this frenzy, with adrenaline pumping through his veins, he stopped at the kitchen sink to wash his gloves before leaving? Did he take his gloves off and open the door with his bare hand? If he did, where are his fingerprints? Or did he stop to change into a fresh pair of gloves while standing in the kitchen, just feet away from Xana Kernodle's body? None of those scenarios make sense. They are too risky, they take too much time, and they don't fit the profile of a killer fleeing the scene. Which means there is a mechanical problem with the lone wolf theory. You cannot have a perpetrator who is drenched in evidence interact with a physical object like a heavy door handle without leaving a trace of that evidence behind. It violates the principle of Locard's exchange principle. Every contact leaves a trace. Unless he didn't touch the door. This brings us back to the theory of the accomplice, the man in the van's shoes, the ghost. If we apply the two-man logic, the clean door stops being a mystery and starts being a confirmation. Imagine the choreography of the exit. Kohberger, the executioner, is finished. He is coming down from the third floor or out of Xana's room. He is dirty, covered in biological material. He knows he cannot touch anything near the exit point or he will leave a trail. Meanwhile, the accomplice, the cleaner, is already at the back door. Maybe he never fully entered the kill zones. Maybe he stayed in the kitchen area, on the perimeter. His gloves are clean. He slides the door open. He holds it. Kohberger walks through the open gap without breaking stride, without touching the frame, without touching the handle. Then, the accomplice steps out and slides the door shut behind them. This is important, because it explains the forensic anomaly perfectly. The door handle was clean because the killer never touched it. The person who touched it was the one who hadn't gotten his hands dirty. From there, you have to look at the path of travel. Investigators found the latent shoe print, the van's print near Dylan's room, which is on the same floor as the kitchen and the exit. This places the second suspect in the exact position needed to secure the exit route. While Kohberger was upstairs, the accomplice could have been downstairs, ensuring the path was clear and the door was prepped for a rapid extraction. The reason this matters is because the prosecution used the lack of DNA on the door to say, "See, no one else touched it." But in reality, the lack of blood on the door proves that the person who opened it couldn't have been the person who committed the stabbings. It is a paradox. The state wants us to believe Kohberger was a chaotic monster capable of stabbing 4 people in minutes, but also a forensic wizard capable of levitating through a locked door without leaving a smear of blood on the latch. In other words, the clean door is the silent witness that corroborates the story of the spotter. One man to do the killing. One man to hold the door. When you combine this with the 4-minute door dash gap, when you combine it with the mismatched shoe print and the discarded glove outside, the picture becomes undeniable. This was not a rampage. This was a tactical execution involving a primary operator and a support role. And the terrifying part, the support operator, the one who held that door open, walked away clean, literally and figuratively. I need you to visualize this exit. You are covered in evidence. You need to get out fast. Do you think it is physically possible for a lone killer to open a heavy sliding door without leaving a single trace of blood? Or does the clean door prove that someone else opened it for him? This is the physics of murder, and right now, the equation only balances if there are two people. So, here we are at the end of the road. On paper, the story of the Idaho murders is finished. Bryan Kohberger is currently sitting in a concrete cell at the Idaho Maximum Security Institution. He will wake up there tomorrow, and he will wake up there every single day for the rest of his natural life. The prosecutors got their conviction. The town of Moscow got its safety back, and the media got their monster. But, if you have walked this journey with me, if you have really looked at the pieces we pulled out of the shadows today, you know that this ending feels hollow. We started this investigation looking for clarity, but what we found was a puzzle that is still missing its most dangerous piece. We cannot unsee the 3 unknown DNA profiles, specifically the one on the black glove discarded right outside the kill zone. We cannot unsee the bloody Van's shoe print that sits on the floor of the crime scene, mocking the fact that Kohberger didn't own a pair of Vans. And we cannot ignore the digital spotter, that 4-minute gap where a second pair of eyes likely signaled that the coast was clear, which means the lone wolf narrative isn't just flawed, it is broken. The reason this matters is because it reveals a hard truth about our justice system. We like to think that a courtroom is a place where the absolute truth is revealed. But the reality is, the legal system prioritizes neatness over the messy, complicated truth. A trial with 2 suspects, where one is unidentified, is a nightmare for a prosecutor. It opens the door for reasonable doubt. It gives the defense a chance to say, look at the other guy. In other words, to ensure Kohberger went to prison, the state had to pretend the other guy didn't exist. Justice, in this case, wasn't a revelation. It was a compromise. They settled for catching the wolf, even if it meant letting the fox get away. What struck me here was terrifying. What I found was that this silence is permanent. Bryan Kohberger has waived his right to appeal. He has accepted his fate. He will stay silent forever within the walls of that Idaho prison. He is never going to tell us who opened that sliding door for him. He is never going to tell us whose Bluetooth signal was pinging next to his car. But I believe, with everything in me, that on that night, he was not alone. And that means only one thing: a second murderer is still walking free out there. Think about that for a second. Somewhere in America right now, there is a person who knows exactly what happened in that house because they were there. Maybe he is living a normal life. Maybe he is a student, a worker, a neighbor. Maybe he is watching this video. He is the owner of the Vans shoes. He is the man who dropped the glove. And he is living with the secret that he helped slaughter 4 innocent young people. So, I have to turn this over to you. We need to talk about who this person is. Criminal profiling suggests that if there is a duo, there is usually a dominant and a submissive. Was Kohberger the mastermind who dragged a friend into his dark fantasy? Or was Kohberger the tool, the weapon used by someone else who stayed clean? Why is Kohberger protecting him? Is it loyalty? Is it fear? Or is it a twisted pact of silence that they made before they ever stepped foot on King Road? I want you to share your theory in the comments. Who is the second man? And do you think the police know who he is but just couldn't prove it? From there, we have to say goodbye to this case. The house at 1122 King Road is gone. It was demolished. The ground is empty now. The snow will fall on that lot again next winter, covering the tracks where a white Elantra once drove in the dark. The screams are gone. The sirens are gone. But, for those of us who have looked at the evidence, the silence is not peaceful. It is heavy. The case is closed, but the ghost is still there. And as long as that bloody Van's footprint remains unexplained, none of us should stop asking questions. Thank you for joining me on this investigation. Stay safe, stay curious, and never stop looking at the shadows.